year. No more questions? Thank you. Okay, as a continuation of one of the strategic plan goals as the 9th grade curriculum evaluation report, and this is in alignment with strategic plan goal 4. And making the presentation is Mr. Greg Johnson. It's also in compliance with board policy 6:210.
Looks like I need a second to pull the presentation up. Just give me a moment.
I'll give a little information. Last fall, in accordance with board policy 6:40, we presented the Board of Education a curriculum evaluation and design process. As written in the report, the process was designed to continuously improve the quality of our curriculum program, focusing on specifically the extent that we produce equitable access and outcomes for our students. And this item is just being presented for information and discussion. If you want to introduce some of the people who are here who did the work, Mr. Johnson, while they do that.
Sure. First, I actually want to start by saying that I want to give Dr. Fiorenza's regrets. She was very much interested in being here tonight, but she is in a bit of a bittersweet moment. She is taking her second son to college, and so she's in transit back from that. And so I talked to her just a little while ago, and you know, she's struggling, so she's not able to be here tonight. But we also just in the room, I know we have 2 division heads who are in the room who have been a big part of the work, Dr. Julie Fry and Amy Hill, as well as a variety of others who've been part of the work in different ways. So. And while we are in this moment of dramatic pause,
Could just go to the agenda.
yeah, if you just click on the agenda. There we go. All right, so I want to just start by reiterating something that I think most people in the room are fairly well aware of at this point. We started almost exactly a year ago by talking to the board about a curriculum evaluation process focused specifically on a grade level focus, right? A grade level perspective. So we went 9th grade, and then our plans to move 10th grade and so on as we moved along. And so at this point, we had planned all along to share out the results of the curriculum evaluation process for our 9th grade students. As we completed that process last year, we got a variety of draft recommendations and conclusions from our various divisions who led this work. As those came in throughout the spring, and as they came into us in late May, we made the decision as a leadership team to add an additional layer to help provide a level of access to all of our students to the rigorous honors level courses that we know we want our freshmen to experience. And so our goal is that by the fall of 21, 2 years from now, to provide that level of access to virtually all of our incoming 9th grade students. And as I move forward throughout this process, I'm going to explain kind of what is it about this 9th grade curriculum evaluation process that made us believe, okay, all right, this extra layer this systemic layer is needed on top of this evaluation process to provide that level of access to our students. So with that said, let me roll forward with how this process unfolded. What you see on this first slide here are the goals of the strategic plan as they existed 2 years ago, when the strategic plan was kind of re-upped, I think the year before I was originally hired as a district, in the district. And I bring this up to highlight 2 things. They are all about access, and they are all about improving the systems of the organization, right? So they are about tightening up kind of how our assessment practices worked, kind of drive and learning in the building, and also about increasing access to quality curriculum for all of our students. And you see the goals there for that, specifically with goal 3. So the question is, based off of those, what have we done? over the past few years. And this is a quick summary of the actions we've taken, some of which Dr. Pruitt-Adams spoke to just a little while ago. We've developed priority standards that we use for that basis of 80% mastery that we were talking about just a few moments ago. We've implemented common assessments across all of our courses that collaborate on our Late Start Wednesdays as part of their TCTs. We've surveyed our students and teachers in an attempt to better understand who is going to be, who we could help to gain better access to AP experiences throughout their years in high school, using the concept of AP potential that the College Board has published. We've utilized our analysis to encourage, we've actually acted on that, right? We've encouraged kids to take AP courses. We've implemented AP Bridge and bump up programs. And just this past year, we revised our course selection process, opening up what kind of had been perceived by some to be a bit of a closed system, allowing parents to make different choices, a broader choice about what courses their ninth grade students should be taking. And you'll see some results for some of those in just a little bit. So with that kind of as the backdrop, the work that led us to the curriculum evaluation is summarized by work that we began a little over a year ago by doing some research. We had a group of about 30-some teachers who did who read a variety of literature, looked at some school data, and we challenged them to come up with problem statements that kind of summed up what we were trying to tackle as a result of our curriculum work. And you see them here. These aren't designed as sequential to kind of collectively give an overall picture of the problem. They were individual teams coming up with kind of their best kind of sum statements of what the problems are. But you do see some overlapping themes in here, all right? And I think in a lot of ways that's summed up by that last bullet. Our current system places students into tracks that are segregated by race and then highly correlated with long-term and academic economic disparities. So after we focused on those problem statements, we challenged ourselves then to kind of figure out, okay, what are the array of causes that are kind of driving that problem? Again, we drew from the research, we drew from our own understanding and expertise as educators. And we came up with these six causes that you see. And you see that this runs the gamut, right? From things that are specific to the community at large, to those things that are specific to school systems, and of course specifically to what goes on, in the classroom, curriculum work, and that which affects it directly, professional development and so on. And so the last thing we did before we dove into the curriculum work was set ourselves up with some guiding principles to help kind of keep ourselves honest through the process. We wanted to make sure that as we were going about this curriculum evaluation process, we had some specific things that were kind of keeping our toes in the fire. And you see those listed here. I'm not going to read these all. You have these in the packet. But I just want to point out that these also are designed to kind of run the gamut of what we're trying to do. These are things that take an eye toward the systems thinking that we spoke to earlier. We need consistency, of course, in our sections. But this doesn't mean that we need blind consistency, that everything needs to be exactly the same. That's bad practice, of course. But there are certain levels of guarantee, right? Certain levels of consistency that we know we do need in place, specifically related to standards and other things. But this also speaks to sorting our students. This speaks to the need to have a growth mindset, not only for our students, but for ourselves as adults moving forward. This speaks to the need that we recognize that if we're evaluating our freshman curriculum, if we're evaluating the experience of our students, we have to have persistence and grit through this process. This is not, by definition, if we're doing it well, easy work. We have to be prepared to ask ourselves hard questions and stare down the information with integrity. And then, of course, we talked about the need for time for this work. If we're going to do this, we have to carve out the space to do it. And so we set up a process. And last October, I brought to the board a curriculum evaluation process that I've alluded to before and that many of you have seen. This process is designed not in the traditional way, right? The traditional curriculum evaluation process takes a look at a vertical scope and sequence. It takes a look at the English division, and then maybe the next year you start with the math, and the next year with another division. That's a common process. We decided that we want to take a look at a grade level focus, and that is for two reasons. Number one, the strategic plan specifically focuses on goals for ninth grade. Number two, this also allows us to make cross-curricular connections between how our students are performing, so that when we are thinking about rolling out the products of our curriculum evaluation, we can do so in a graduated way, right, that is going to affect our students more holistically. And so you can see how this unfolds, 9th grade, 1st, 10th grade, and so on. The last thing I'll say on this slide is that we are talking about a 4-year process until full implementation, right? An evaluation process, a design phase, pilot implementation, which really consists of action research, and then of course full implementation. So the first time we're able to really say that yes, we're doing the work that's the product of our evaluation would be the fall of 21. So what did this look like? You know what? I want to take a moment actually to underscore something that Dr. Pruitt Adams spoke about a little while ago. There's a shift, and I'm going to get just a little esoteric for a moment, but there is a difference in the literature between transformational work and transformative work. And it might not be the most interesting and exciting thing to talk about, but it does matter. Transformational work, it comes from systems thinking, and it is really just about tightening up systems and making sure the system is doing what it said it's going to do. We've done that work. That's important. We don't want to lose sight of that. But the word transformative in the educational literature comes in two veins. It comes from transformative learning theory, and it comes from transformative leadership. And both of those things are focused on social justice. They come out of that tradition. So the idea is focusing on who our system is and is not serving well, and what we need to do as adults to challenge our mindsets to transform the system and begin to do things a little bit differently. And so this 4-step process comes out of that transformative leadership arena. And so that's where you have this examination of current practices, reflection on our approach as educators, engaging our stakeholders, and determining a course of action. And that's the approach that we took when we were evaluating our curriculum. And you'll see that illustrated by the data that we collected last year through this process. Each of our divisions met 2 days in the spring semester. One was really a data analysis day, and the next day was kind of completing that analysis and figuring out where we're going to move forward. And so if you look at this slide, in the top right is really where it starts. We started by taking a look at our current practices. And teachers brought all sorts of information to the table. And they did so with a lot of transparency, a lot of honesty, a lot of integrity. They brought their maps, they brought a variety of syllabi, they brought assignments and practices. Sometimes they brought things that were really current, like I had just done this in my class. And they also brought samples of student work to illustrate what their students were producing in their classes. Go over the left-hand side. The next thing we took a look at were more quantitative data, right? Traditional hard data. We took a look at course enrollment trends, all right? What is the ebb and flow in different courses from year to year? Then we looked at the course progression analyses, right? So what percentage of kids are moving from this course to this course, depending on their starting point. And we found some really interesting results there. Of course, we took a look at grades. We took a look at how grades are distributed across demographic groups. And of course, where it was appropriate and it could be illustrative of how our students are performing, we took a look at SAT achievement analysis, or PSAT achievement analysis as well. The last thing we did on that first day was we set ourselves, we challenged ourselves to come up with a series of focus group questions to help us better understand the key stakeholder in all this, whose voice is missing thus far, and that would be our students. And so at first we didn't know if we could tackle it, but the groups decided that they wanted to do 2 focus groups for each division. And so I want to give a nod to Crystal Jones and her team, our coordinator of assessment research, for conducting 14 focus groups last spring semester to gather an idea of what our students are saying their freshman experience either was or is like, depending on the population. We didn't micromanage exactly what each student group was by division. They set their student groups based off of the themes that they were beginning to understand and the data up until this point. And so you'll see kind of what those questions ended up being as we move forward. But anyway, those are the 3 big data sets that we were looking at: current practices, students, and the quantitative data. And so I want to give you a brief overview of what some of this data tells us. And again, this is a little bit mile high. This is a summary of what really is in those draft reports I was talking about. But you see what has been the trend over the past 3 years, right, with AP honors enrollment. There's a little bit, I'm going to say there's a little bit of apples to oranges in this data to some extent because we haven't completed a year, so the 2019 data is who's starting the year right now in these classes, while the previous years are complete. But you do see that there is a little bit of decline overall in students who are taking honors enrollment. It's hard to know if that really is a significant trend with the 3 years of data that we have here. But you see essentially static data as far as AP honors enrollment is concerned here. 9th grade honors enrollment is a little bit different in one way. And what you see here is for last year, I talked about how we changed our course selection process a little bit. You'll see that for our Black or African American students and for our multiracial students last year, a significant uptick in 9th grade honors enrollment. Now it's not way above what it was in 2017, but both of those numbers are the highest they've been of the 3 years data that we see there. Okay, and we can go back to this if we need later on. The second data that we took a look at was SAT suite of assessments. And again, these are just highlights from that data. And what this data tells us is that we are something we know, right? We are a high achieving school district. Our overall student population consistently hits expected growth in both evidence-based reading, writing, and math. That's in overall in aggregate. In the fall of 19, these are also 2 impressive stats. All groups of students hit expected growth on evidence-based reading, writing from the PSAT 8-9 to the PSAT 10. And all groups of students hit expected growth on math. As well, from the PSAT 10 to the SAT. And you saw this data last spring when Crystal Jones and I presented this information to the board.
Greg, can I just ask you to briefly just expected growth?
Sure. So, so the College Board publishes expected growth based off of analysis of all of the data that they pull from their assessments, throughout the country. And so they say when students are generally in 9th grade, this is the growth, right, that they would expect students to see in order to continue to be on track towards hitting benchmark in future years. And so our students are showing growth is the story here, and that's great to know. And we see that growth existing across demographic groups. But actually, as we saw Amy Hill say in the documentary, the pace of growth for our white students consistently outperforms the pace of growth for our Black and brown students. And that's what that last bullet identifies. And that has been a trend that is consistent. And just like the data we talked about before, it's relatively static data. It was true in the ACT when Amy was talking about it, and it's true certainly here with the data that we're beginning to see in the past few years with the SAT. So the next few slides gives kind of a summary of a little bit more of the qualitative data. What did we learn from our students? And again, I'm not going to read all of this for you right now, but this data kind of clumped itself based off of the questions that we got across the divisions into different categories. We see regarding relevancy, regarding students feeling prepared. You see students really gave us great information about things that they appreciated and they liked in our curriculum. We saw some real strengths coming through here. And so you see that they love relevant discussions. They love when there were really clear communication of objectives and so on. So I'll let you digest that just for a moment. One of the things that was interesting, actually I will say on the slide before I move on, is what came across specifically in 2 of our focus groups, PSAT reading, they found it a lot harder than what they had been doing in their classes. And so you had some students saying, look, we want some harder text to help us prep for that. As far as transitions were concerned, students are telling us from 8th grade to 9th grade, writing and math expectations are jumping. And this is hard for us, all right? It's good to have these high expectations. I think that's great for us. But what are we doing to support our kids through those transitions is one thing that our groups really focused on. They sometimes had a hard time seeing connections, and that's just not from 8 to 9, but also from 9 to 10, or from 10 to 11, and so on. They talked a lot about feedback they were given, and they really appreciated the thorough comments and feedback they were getting, specifically on writing, but that came through in other areas as well. And again, you see kind of clarity, kids really appreciated knowing exactly what the target was and being able to hit that. These are things we know. If you know teaching and learning, right, you know that these are things that we all know are good to do in our classrooms. And our students feel connected. So what our divisions now did based off of this data is that they came up with analysis and conclusions, and these are some of the themes that come across. I'm going to just throw one caveat here. What you see on these next two slides are necessarily, because of how I'm presenting this, a bit clunky, right? We're taking a look at what are the themes that popped up across divisions that were the most common. I'm not saying that these themes came across in all divisions. I'm not saying that this represents one division specifically. I'm saying that these were things that kind of just, seemed to theme out as we went through the work. One thing was consistent. Our efforts to identify priority standards and common assessments over the past few years have produced an increased level of consistency. But there is still a level of variance that we see. And our teachers were very, very, very open and clear about where they saw that as a strength, and where they saw that as something that needed to be addressed in some situations. Enrollment patterns in college prep and honors are consistently racialized. We saw that across the board. We actually went further back in the standard years. We went back to 6 years, and the story is really clear. And specifically, there's a consistent and significant gender and racial grade gap, to the point that it was consistent across divisions, but we had one division clearly explain that in their analysis there that there isn't a whole lot of evidence that if you are in an honors class, all right, that you aren't going to have access, right, to an A or a B. That's the most common grade, and that is particularly the case if you are a white female student in those honors classes. The rate of A's specifically for that population is very consistent. We also have seen that the rates of A's in honors courses has increased over time, right? It's over that 6 year trend. But in college prep courses, that bell curve is certainly there. This was a stat that was really interesting to see. Again, this is an aggregate kind of sum of what that data is, but we saw that kids, about 10 to 20% of our population, year in and year out, were saying, no, I'm going to move from college prep into honors. And we were able to look at that beyond just freshman to sophomore jump, but that was fairly consistent across our divisions. We also saw that while about 50% of our students are in honors courses, we actually have about 70 to 80% that are meeting or exceeding benchmarks throughout the population, suggesting that there's room to grow in the school. Students in college prep courses are less likely to report that they feel challenged than their peers in their honors courses as well. That was a theme that we saw coming through. And I want to give kudos to our teams here. These are the conclusions that our teams did not shy away from. They hit this straight. The freshman experience, these are not, again, any individual division that we're really speaking to here, but instead what we're talking about are kind of those kind of themes again. The freshman experience is not equitable because students have different experiences across sections and levels. Despite having a relatively equitable experience between sections, outcomes are more inequitable than experiences would suggest. Tracking, availability of interventions, curricular inconsistency between sections, and inconsistent grading practices all contribute to the inequitable outcomes our students experience. And finally, differences in student learning experiences are racialized and gendered, producing different outcomes, different quality of experiences across and within levels. So, what happened after we got these recommendations in, these drafts for how we could move forward with our professional development and our curriculum design moving forward, were a series of conversations that I had with our division heads once the year ended last year with our in June, and it became evident throughout this that in order to move forward with some of the recommendations that you're going to see here in a moment, again, a layer helping to provide access to more and more students to our high quality rigorous curriculum is necessary. So keep that in mind as you take a look at some of the recommendations that you see here. In order to increase relevancy, again, this is good pedagogy you see outlined. This is high quality work. Consistently articulate the why of the curriculum. Link skills-based curricula with more diverse cultural content. And that was across divisions. Infuse cultural experiences throughout our units so that it's not just something that we're adding on and saying, hey, there it is, but the word infuse there was critical to that group. Allow for greater student choice and voice in curricular materials and instructional approaches. Regarding assessments, develop and utilize common rubrics so that how we are using common assessments has that additional layer. Research our alternative grading practices. One of the things we heard is that there's a lot of variety in grading practices. That may or may not be a good thing, but the idea was to take a look at other ways we can go about that work. And there's a lot of research about grading out there that could be useful. Review assumptions about the use of homework, which is, every year I've been here, has been a theme that has popped up. And implement 9-12 writing portfolios. Again, these are things that came across divisions. Actually, I'll say 9-12 writing portfolios was specific to our English division. Regarding the quality of the curriculum itself, access to a quality curriculum. Recommendations were examining earned honors credit. Open up our study halls to allow for more electives freshman year. The idea is that during freshman year, not enough kids can have access to some of the curricular experiences because we have that study hall in there. One group really wanted to make sure we focused on that, which was echoed by a second. And finally, review practice related to how we are sorting our students by the different levels during that freshman year, which was a theme across a few divisions. For successful implementation, and now this is something that we take to heart as we move forward with these recommendations. Are we just going to say it, or are we really going to mean it? And so the recommendations were align teaching assignments to support professional development and planning. Make sure that our teachers are best positioned to utilize the professional development that we know we want to provide. Provide work-embedded professional development in culturally relevant pedagogy, differentiation, and constructivist learning specifically. Develop a system of student supports. In fact, I'll point out that the second and third bullets there are the ones that have been the most frequent points of conversation thus far, in a few days that we've been in session here this fall. And finally, provide collaboration with districts 90, 97 for 612 articulation as we go about these recommendations. And so the last thing I want to say here is again referencing that level. And I have 2 slides to illustrate this. And that systemic level that we know we need to put in place to help make sure that the changes we're making in the curriculum are accessible for the widest array of students that we can provide. We're talking about transition to high-level rigorous 9th grade curriculum in English, history, science, and world languages. Reduce the number of entry points in math. We found out through this process that there actually were at least 10 different entry points for our students in math last year. And then finally, implement an earned honors model to provide that access to that honors experience for our freshman year. The last thing that I want to say is what are we talking about as far as timeline with this is concerned. 2019-20, we need to continue our work. We're going to begin a sophomore curriculum evaluation, of course, but we have to dive into this design process moving forward. And you can see the key themes there that I've referenced earlier. Next school year, we anticipate action research, whatever curricular assessment resources that we identify for this work to be successful. We're going to begin to work with that with our students next year with the idea of full implementation and review in the 2021-2022 school year. The last thing I want to say before I open it up for questions is that we know right now that what we are doing is we are getting data in from our students from our feeder districts based off of common assessments, standards assessments, and a little bit of other data. But what we don't think makes sense as we move forward is taking that little bit of data and saying, college prep and honors, before we even know who these students are as human beings, before we even know who they are as learners, link them up to a course experience that in some cases doesn't give them access to the level of rigor and honors experience that provides them with the type of success that we know many of our students are capable of moving forward in subsequent years. So this really is a question of access, and that's why we're committed to this moving forward.
Questions, comments?
Okay. I'll go. So one of the things, thank you, first of all, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I have 3 questions. The first one is, what other districts or what other pieces of research did you guys look at in this process of like determining these actually work? Like what were some of those evidence-based pieces that you looked at?
Are you referring to the recommendations that the divisions came to, or the systemic level regarding the one experience?
Actually, both.
Yeah, good. So, as far as the divisions, it varied, right? I mean, the teachers brought to the table for their recommendations their own experience with professional experience they had in the past, and we were relying on the research that we had utilized to kickstart this process a year earlier, which I'd be happy to provide, which speaks to an array of culture-responsive pedagogy, being specific about race, with social-emotional learning, and then also how the effect of how we sort students, right? How that has on students. So a lot of that work. We are in the process of developing, pulling together what the information we need to figure out the professional development moving forward. And actually, it's the same answer really for the systemic level, right? Moving towards that common access to the honors experience. And the research about that is consistently clear. Providing access to rigorous honors experiences has consistently been proven in the research to increase achievement and outcomes across the board for students of color. That's really unambiguous in research. What's also a very common theme in research is that we can do this without negatively affecting our other students. We can do that without watering down or weakening the quality of our curriculum. And that's critical, right? We can't do anything if we think it's going to damage anything in the process, or provide something less. But that kind of dichotomy of providing something more for one group and thinking in some ways that's going to hurt another group is something that I think we really need to stare down. We can provide access while maintaining the level of excellence that we've accustomed to here at OPRF, and take significant steps towards what we want to be as an organization. And research speaks to this.
Can I keep going?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. You talked about the transition, writing and math by group from 8th grade, right? And how there was discrepancy, right, in that area. I'm curious about the work, you mentioned something about the work that D200, our feeder districts, that could support that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
That was a recommendation for what we need to do moving forward. Since I've worked here, certainly I've been in conversation with both 90 and 97 about curriculum, with the deepest conversation being in math. And so if the question was aimed at kind of what has existed, it's really kind of talking about math and how the transition works for those students. We need to expand that, right, for other curricular areas as well, and that's part of our recommendation.
And my last question was, can you explain a little bit more what the earned honors model?
No.
Can you give some more detail about what that is?
Okay, first I'm going to say that the reason we are taking 2 years to do this work is because we have to figure out what that earned honors model is going to be in different divisions. It may be the case that there's a common earned honors model that we want to implement across the board. It may be the case that we know because of what we find out that there are different ways we want that to play out in different divisions. We need time to study and figure that out. But we haven't done, we aren't ignorant about that model in 2 ways. There are other school districts in this area who use earned honors credit. But more specifically, and we've learned from them, and we will continue to learn from them. But we are using it right now in the school. The models sequence in science, models physics, models chemistry, models biology, uses the earned honors credit model to provide a wider swath of our population with access to honors experience. And Dr. Pruitt-Adams alluded to this earlier in a presentation. One of the things we have found out is really critical for our faith in this movement going forward. We have had students in that model sequence for 2 years now, after 2 years in it, decide, you know what, I'm going to skip models of bio. I'm going to take AP biology instead. And one of the things that we have found is that their performance on that AP biology test, the first year was right on par, just a little bit, one tick under, right, what we saw for students who were in the honor sequence and taking AP biology. This past year, they actually outperformed the crew who was moving in the other way. But another story about that is really worth naming is that because in order to make that happen, we had to say, look, taking biology freshman year is no longer a prerequisite to the AP biology experience. We got rid of this prerequisite experience for AP bio, and the AP biology enrollment has significantly increased over that 2-year swath of time. So we've expanded access to our AP curriculum without sacrificing the quality of what that AP curriculum is. As a result of that experiment that we've done with the model sequence, we can grow from that, we can learn from that, and we can expand that in other areas of the organization.
So you do a beautiful presentation, so thank you very much for that. Just looking at the timeline and looking about how, every year you're going to add on another layer of work, and it seems that this rests heavily on you and on the division heads especially. And I'm a little nervous about being able to sustain that over 4 years, because by year 4 you're juggling 4 balls instead of just one.
Yeah, you're not the only one.
Okay, so that is built in, right? Like, I'm not the only one.
We've had that conversation.
Okay.
We have, and I'll just add this to it. We're going to have to think about this moving forward, exactly how that plays out in subsequent years. And it's true across the board, but think about divisions that are smaller. Like when you're taking a look at our languages, for example. Just for example, you have a smaller group of teachers who are teaching French in the organization. We would be really taxing those teachers moving forward in an incredibly unfair way. And so we're going to have to think about exactly how that plays out moving forward. But I love a concrete answer.
Can I just ask you just to give some clarification to part of Ms. Bobby's question? The removal of the 9th grade piece is 9th grade. The curriculum audit is the 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. But you won't have to do some of the removal of taking away, because you won't have to do anything with college prep. Am I making sense? The work you're doing in the 9th grade curriculum is different separate from the audit. This is a result of the audit.
Correct. Yeah, that's correct. I mean, what's happening right now is in some ways bigger in scope than what we anticipate in subsequent years. Yeah, that's
I guess my subtext is, if this takes us longer than we think it does, I, as a board member, would be fine with that, because we have to get this right. This is some very innovative and I think very exciting opportunities that we're presenting our families and our students with, but we got to do it right. So if that, if it needs more time, it needs more time.
Thank you.
Okay, and so one thing, Greg, I appreciate you saying, but I think we have to say loud and clear and repeatedly. A lot of people think an equity initiative and excellence in education are separate from each other, when in fact that's not the case at all. Equity initiatives, if you really think about what they do, is they help build an excellent educational experience for all students. No student loses access to high rigor. What we end up doing, if you think about an equitable system, is one where every student is receiving an education that meets that student's needs, whether that student is the most gifted one to ever walk in our building, or whether that student needs supports, and irrespective of that student's identity, cultural background, racial or ethnic background. So it's all about building excellence. I heard you say that. We have to make that very clear to the community. This is building excellence. Second, just about some of the specifics of pedagogical practices, because I'm hearing you say a number of things that are incorporated in the UDL, the Universal Design for Learning. How much did you look at the UDL, which is one of the evidence-based practices that has really been shown to strongly eliminate performance gaps over time, and how much of that is actually incorporated into what you're doing?
So Universal Design for Learning came up last year initially when we were talking with our division heads about how we wanted to move forward with our curriculum design. So it's already been named right off the bat. And it's actually listed in our curriculum evaluation design manual as part of the framework we know we want to use moving forward. So that's the immediate answer to your question. The applied answer to your question is in the future. Right. So as we're designing our experiences moving forward, what Universal Design does is it provides a path for differentiation as you are meeting the needs of a variety of people within your organization. I mean, I think from what I understand there, it didn't even come out of learning theory initially. I think it came out of how organizations meet the need of their constituency outside of education. But it applies for education incredibly well. So to the extent that we named it as part of our framework, and to the extent that we know we need to focus on differentiation, focused on culture of responsiveness and constructive learning principles, it's hand in glove. And so, but that PD has to be thoughtfully designed immediately.
Right, and I just want to say that I'm glad you're doing that. That's not only the best practices for the high school level, for pre-high school, it's now what universities are going to. So all the in-service that I'm getting as a faculty member at Roosevelt University, talked to a few of my colleagues at other universities, they're all going through elements of UDL. So this is something that students are to continue to be exposed to as they move through the educational process, even post-high school. And it is truly evidence and research-based. It is a best practice, and so it's great that it's part of what we're doing. And excuse me, I'm very happy about that. And I applaud you for the focus on the professional development piece. And that can't be understated, right? I mean, we have to identify evidence-based professional development. That's what ultimately will really bring us to success in this in this program and in this attempt, because without really strong, repeated, evidence-based professional development that gets embedded in the classroom, it's really hard to affect the kind of change you are trying to affect. So I saw that, I highlighted it when I went through the PowerPoint you provided to the board in advance, and I think it's up to the board to really work collaboratively with the administration and supporting them and identifying and recommending to us the appropriate professional development pieces and really giving them the resources they need to.
I know Jean has another question. Are there others that want to weigh in? Tom?
I had a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to kind of actually make sure from a timing, kind of following up with what Sarah said, and maybe tying into what Ralph said, because once you start, you can't slow down, right? I mean, because if you're ninth grade, you start, you can't take a year off. So it's really about when you start.
Right.
There's not going to be the pace will have been set.
Well, we have to make sure. I mean, there are two things embedded in Sarah's question that I can help illustrate. We can't overtax our teachers and their capacity to make this work. And so I want to underscore the point that Dr. Fred Adams mentioned too. I mean, the scope of this work is going to have to, the amount we bite off is going to have to shift as we move forward, right? So as we're talking about 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade, we're not going to be able to take such a big step forward with each of those grade levels because of the capacity issue that it presents us as learners in the organization. And that's also going to be the case when we think about the fact that in 9th grade is a good place to start because so many kids are entering here with a relatively common experience, or I should say relatively common schedule, right? You have more and more freedom and play in your schedule as a student when you move through your high school years. And so the focus of that, of our professional development work is going to be more diffused as you move forward, which will allow us to be a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more smaller in scope when we're figuring out how we're going to go forward. So right now, that's the answer I can give to that. It's a reasonable note of caution to share, and I think it's one that a lot of people share moving forward, and we're going to have to think that through. So.
Ralph mentioned something that spurred my thought. The communication to the community, and I know that nationally there are quite a few districts that have done this and done it successfully.
Right.
I'm curious about how we could share the information of the success rate of actually implementing something at this, like that's already been proven in multiple states.
There will be on our website. There will be there'll be a sign. There'll be a page that illustrates what we're doing here, what our goals and what our rationale is. That site will also have in it a bibliography of resources that we have utilized and read, additional things that support where we're going. that will help to, I think, provide much of what you're saying. But take a look at that, and if there's additional questions you have or information you'd like to see there, I'd be interested in hearing.
The other thing we plan to do is host several community engagements. We're going to host one here. We're working now with D90, D97 to identify dates to have community conversations with parents at each of the middle schools. Tomorrow morning, the FAQ, as you indicated, along with the list of resources, will be on our website as well.
We're whispering? Why are we whispering?
Again,
I was trying to read what he was.
you may want to talk about that FAQ before it goes out.
The comments you made to Greg.
Yes. Am I in line with?
I just wanted to piggyback something that Tom said, and I feel like I'm being Tom and Craig right now, which rarely am the finance voice, but as we're talking about resources, Ralph alluded to it, you have talked about not overtaxing our staff, but the professional development needs, there's how do we carve that out in terms of budgetary needs, but also from the focus groups, the students talking about needing more support. What does that look like? Is it tutoring center? Is it what does that look like? Because there will be it's either human resources or there are things we're going to need. So how do we plan for this 4 years to ensure that we are doing this with fidelity?
Yes, there certainly could be resource asks that come from this in order to support our students. Exactly, it's the same answer, and I'm sorry, but but I'm not sorry, actually. I mean, we don't know exactly what that support structure is going to look like for our students moving forward. But I want to illustrate your question that we've talked about already. There was a slide that talked about where we're talking about increasing access to quality curriculum. I was talking about the freshman study halls, all right? And one recommendation, you have two divisions that talk about utilizing those study halls potentially to increase that access. Well, that could be access to existing curricular experiences, high-level curricular experiences, but it also could be access to specific supports. Right now, we know that those study halls are they're supervisory assignments for our teachers, and we cannot get into a situation of expecting teachers doing a supervisory assignment like that to provide supports of this type. That can't happen, or supports, period. And so what we need to do is, if we're going to utilize that space for that, there are FTE implications that could potentially come from that. That's not a guarantee, that's not an absolute. We know, I'm not saying that that's absolutely something that's coming, but that's a space that we have access to our freshmen during the school day that is underutilized as far as direct instructional intervention is concerned. So of course we're going to look at that. But again, there are two key priorities that Dr. Fiorenza has identified moving forward. And it is supports for our students, and it is professional learning for our teachers moving forward with this. Those are the top two priorities.
I just have this is, after all of my, the bright, shiny stuff, is there a way, when we say access to quality curriculum, that's just rubbing me the wrong way. As though some of our students don't have access to quality curriculum. That it's aspirational as opposed to the standard. So I don't know, it just is, it's reading a little funky.
That's not the intent at all, but
Exactly.
I clearly
Exactly.
hear how that's coming across, so
Yeah.
we'll think that through.
Ralph, you have-
Yeah, just a couple little things. And Greg, you and I talked about this before. So as you do focus groups and you're going to implement 10th grade next year and 11th grade, you do have a cohort bias issue. And it's one of the reasons why curriculum review is usually done in an articulated basis across grade levels, right? So I would just want you to be thinking about a way to control for cohort bias, or maybe find a way to get information from students that aren't in the cohort that have gone through the whole process and is the same cohort throughout, okay? I just think that that will add some important depth to the data that you're collecting. And when we are talking about the articulation piece going down to the middle school level, and you mentioned math, and I'm sure you know this, but this is something that I think the community needs to know. One of the challenges is current state standards in math can't be taught in your classic 46-minute class. Meaning kids aren't getting all of the state standards in K through 8 in the classroom. And particularly the kids in advanced classes. They're just skipping stuff. And where the holes in that learning show up is usually in high school when they start getting into tougher courses. So when you talk about the articulation piece, I think working with the middle schools 97 and 90 on that, particularly in math, would be really helpful for our student population.
I look back at Dr. Fry.
I just want to make a comment going back to Mr. Martiri's comment about the cohort groups moving forward. With the 10th grade piece starting the curriculum being reviewed this year, it would be that cohort group of freshmen last year. As they move
Okay,
through.
so it's not going to be the 9th graders.
The people who were sophomores this year were the focus groups used last year. So if they're doing a focus, that I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding him.
Yeah,
But he
right.
talked about cohort flow in the focus groups. So the focus groups this year for 10th grade would be the students who were potentially part of a focus group the freshman year. And then when they get to the 11th grade curriculum review, it would be that same group in the 12th grade.
And that's
So
where
it
the
is a
cohort bias comes in. It's the same cohort of kids.
Right.
And so you do want to get different experiences of different kids and
Yeah.
information from, because cohorts are very different from each other. Anyone who's taught knows
Yeah.
this year's class ain't nothing like last year's class.
So they would have to make sure that, because they didn't have a focus group with every freshman, that the group is a mixed group.
Gina, did you have? Okay. Matt?
I have a few observations that you can correct if they're wrong. So if I can put it in the form of a question in my tone, if not explicitly. So the first thing is that this is something that freshmen in 2 years, when this is at that stage, it'll be their first year as freshmen. And it'll be the first, 5th, 10th, 20th year for teachers to be teaching freshmen. And so with that as the backdrop, my sense is that the biggest challenge in that classroom will be for the teachers to then be able to differentiate their teaching and their grading for those students. And so, am I on the right track with all that? I mean, not to say there won't be a challenge for students, because school is a challenge, and so that's why I also would echo what has been said in terms of just the huge importance of professional development, and also because it's the rigor here is going to be the rigor. I think the teachers here are going to have to step up their game.
Well, I'll tell you.
Not that they don't have a good game, but that this is a challenging thing to pull off. So correct me or whatever you would say to that, if you would.
I'll say two things to that. First of all, I want to point out that we are doing this in a variety of places throughout this organization right now. You know, I mean, our electives are doing this, and world languages, we've already been doing this. And so I don't know if I would say it as our teachers need to step up their game as much as I say that we need to access those high quality skills that are already exhibiting in our building on a day-to-day basis, and ensuring that we're kind of maximizing those across the board throughout the school. So that's key moving forward. But you are right, though, in the sense very much that the need for a focus on differentiated instruction is something that our teachers are talking about right now. There's no doubt that there were conversations about that in the school today with feelings of anxiety. So we need to be real about that. Adult learning is hard. It really is hard for all of us. And so we should expect a level of, oh gosh, right? How can we do this? What do I have to change? Frustration about such a change is to be expected. So specific attention to what we need to, our own learning as we go through that process is absolutely necessary. So
Also, just another thing I heard or saw, assumptions about the use of homework. It might need to be revised. Is that code for what? Or is that leaning towards less homework being assigned? Or is that a quantity thing?
You know, I actually didn't mean that as a code. I meant that as kind of a generalization. I mean, there were different reasons why different groups wanted to take a look at homework, period. So in some cases, it's sheer volume across the board, right? In some cases, it is making sure that homework is used for what homework should be used for. There were conversations we had about the old flipping the classroom idea, which actually is not so old, right? And utilizing homework as kind of an upload of information so that deeper learning can happen in the classroom. So examining homework, the exact words I use on this, I'm not sure, but it is meant to convey that whole concept, right? How are we using it? Why are we using it this way? And are we deliberate about it?
And then one last observation is, I think the timing of this is really fortuitous in terms of the Imagine plan, the build-out and the transformation of the classrooms, the physical settings. I know one of the things that came up in that process was when students are surrounded by an environment that is more conducive to learning and to being engaged and wanting to stay longer in the common areas as well as the classrooms, it raises all ships. So I really am excited about that, and kind of amplifies our desire to get that project moving. So, well,
That was not deliberate.
thank you very much. Really excellent overview.
Thank you. This was extremely helpful.
Thank you.
Oh, boy. Okay. Yeah, consent. So we are now at our consent agenda. Are there any items that anyone wants to pull for individual consideration?
I don't have the memorandum.
Okay, so F. All right.
It is.
No, it's,
Yes, it is F.
Ooh, it is. E and F looks a lot alike. Okay. So I move to approve the following consent items. A, check disbursements and financial resolutions dated August 22nd, 2019. B, monthly treasurer's report. C, monthly financials. D, acceptance of gifts and donations. E, personnel recommendations, including new hires, transfers, and resignations. G, contact with College Board school-wide PSA contract, with College Board school-wide PSAT testing. H, contract with Securitex. I, intergovernmental agreement for purchase of fuel. J, policies for second read, 4:190, targeted school violence prevention program. 5:30, hiring process and criteria. 5:60, expenses. 5:100, staff development program. 5:200, terms and conditions of employment and dismissal. 5:220, substitute teachers. 5:230, maintaining student discipline. 5:270, employment at will, compensation and assignment. 5:280, duties and qualifications. 6:310, high school credit for non-district experiences, course substitutions, re-entering students. 7:50, school admissions and student transfers to and from non-district schools. 7:270, administering medicines to students. 7:310, restrictions on publications, elementary schools. 8:30, visitors to and conduct on school property. And K, policies for first read, including policy 2:110, qualifications, terms, and duties of board officers. Policy 2:140, communications to and from the board. Policy 2:230, public participation at board education meetings and petitions to the board. Policy 2:240, board policy development. Policy 2:260, uniform grievance procedures. Policy 3:60, administrative responsibility of the principal. Policy 4:90, student activity accounts. Policy 5:35, compliance with the Fair Labor Standards Act. Policy 5:40, communicable and chronic infectious disease. Policy 5:130, responsibilities concerning internal information. Policy 5:180, temporary illness or temporary incapacity. Policy 5:290, employment terminations and suspensions. Policy 6:40, curriculum development. Policy 6:110, programs for students at risk of academic failure and/or dropping out of school and graduation incentive programs. Policy 6:340, student testing and assessment program. Policy 7:170, vandalism. L, open and close minutes of June 27th, July 11th, and August 13, 2019, and a declaration that the closed session audio tapes of January 2018 shall be destroyed. And ask for a second.
Second.
Mr. Isley?
Yes.
Mr. Martyri?
Yes.
Ms. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Kowski?
Yes.
Ms. Spivey?
Yes.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
And Dr. Moore?
Yes. And now we will, I move to approve item F, memorandum of agreement with Faculty Senate, and ask for a second.
Second.
Is there any discussion or questions? Okay, we can have our vote.
Mr. Kowski?
No.
Ms. Spivey?
Yes.
Mr. Barron?
No.
Mr. Isley?
No.
Mr. Martyri?
Yes.
Ms. Harris?
Yes.
Dr. Moore?
Yes.
Motion.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. And now we will go to our action items. Move for approval of master agreement with construction manager. And ask for a second.
Second.
Coming
Oh.
Coming forward, we have Mike Barraggio.
Coming forward, we have Mike Carriosho.
Should I go back and come back?
That's the best part, is
Okay. This item was presented at the committee of the whole on August 13th, and then at the special board meeting that same night. Tonight, we are asking the board to approve the master agreement with Pepper Construction Company as presented. This is in compliance with Strategic Plan Goal 6, Board Policy 2:170, and 4:150. Mr. Carriosho.
Thank you, Dr. Pruitt-Adams. So there was an issue that was brought forward about section 2.2.6, and that came up at our committee of the whole meeting. That particular section has been removed, and the whole section has been renumbered. So there still is a C, but it's that the offending paragraph is gone. So at this point, we recommend that the board approve the master agreement with Pepper Construction as presented. Any questions?
Any questions? Oh, okay. We have thoroughly vetted this in our committee of the whole meeting, so I think we're ready.
Mr. Isley?
Yes.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Mr. Martyri?
Yes.
Ms. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Kowski?
Yes.
Ms. Spivey?
Yes.
And Dr. Moore?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is the recommendation of Culture, Climate, and Behavior Committee members for the 2019-2020 school year. The board did receive a revised version this evening as well. And so this item is, we're recommending to move to approve the amended membership list of the Culture, Climate, and Behavior Committee that is presented at this meeting. This is compliance with Strategic Plan Goals 1 and 3, Board Goal for Stakeholder Engagement, and Policy 2:110.
Okay, so I will move for approval of the Culture, Climate, and Behavior membership for 2019-2020.
Second.
Any questions? Okay.
Mr. Martyri?
Yes.
Ms. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Kowski?
Yes.
Ms. Spivey?
Yes.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Mr. Isley?
Yes.
And Dr. Moore?
Yes.
The next item is the presentation of the hotel contract for prom 2020. This is after researching other venues. The recommendation is for the Board of Education to review and approve the Chicago Marriott downtown contract for prom 2020. This is in compliance with Goal 6, Strategic Plan, and Policy 4:160. Coming forward is Susan Johnson, Director of Student Activities, and Mr. Greg Johnson, Associate Superintendent.
So we need a, I feel like I'm talking about the, move to approve the contract with Marriott for prom venue.
Second.
So we want to change the prom venue. We did some research this summer, and we've decided that the Marriott Hotel downtown can give us a comparable experience that the students have been having at the Hyatt for the last 20, 25 years. But they can give it to us at a better rate. And so with the reduction, a 17% reduction by switching to this venue, we can still maintain a great location, a great experience, and a safe environment for our students.
Questions, comments? Oh, like you're priming. Okay,
Okay, Mr. Martyri?
Yes.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Mr. Isley?
Yes.
Ms. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Kopsky?
Yes.
Ms. Spivey?
Yes.
And Dr. Neal?
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our action items for now as we will reconvene closed session. Our information items are there for your perusal. Are there any future agenda items?
If I may, and quickly note that just under the board reports, I submitted a report on the Alumni Association to Gail. Also, I was at the iGov meeting a few weeks ago, and I don't know if it's locked in yet, but Saturday, October 26th is a date that's been envisioned as an assembly. But I'll get back to you all as quickly as I can hear more detail on that. Thank you.
Okay, so we will recess.
Oh, there may be some future, I may have preempted some futuristic items, I'm sorry.
Wait,
I leapfrogged back over the future items, so I didn't know if
well, that did seem like, okay,
Anyway, I didn't want to
no.
speak up. Okay.
I have a future item. It's really more of a request from a board retreat item. I'd like us to discuss how we review policy
Great.
at the board retreat or in some other forum, because we go through a lot of policy. I'm not sure that we do a great job of we do it justice would be the right thing, and I'd like us to make sure we get a process to do it justice.
We were just discussing that yesterday, so.
So,
Thank you.
right on time.
Yes.
I'm also going to do one on contracts.
All right, fun times. Okay, so we will recess open session for 7 minutes, come back for closed session. Thank you all.